My name is Bob Fuchs. I've been a homeowner in Carmel Valley for nearly 26 years. I've been a commercial real estate lender and mortgage banker for nearly 40 years. I've been a tenant in the High Bluff office corridor for 17 of the last 22 years. The slide before you is a rendering taken from the fire plans submitted to the city by the developer. And while not of the very best quality, it's by far the best representation I've seen so far from a fairly close-in perspective, and this slide begins to show the density of the proposed project. I speak today on behalf of a group of Carmel Valley residents called One Paseo-Main Street. We are concerned that the developer's promotional efforts focus solely on the attractions of a small part of the project and obscure the increased scale and accompanying negative impacts from the entire project, which would come about from the developer's request for a much greater increase in allowable building area. The group came into being about a year ago, shortly after the developer's glamorous 20-page brochure came out, and it was apparent that the depictions and the characterizations in the brochure had a significant disconnect from the preliminary facts outlined in the city's notice to the community in May of 2010. We have all talked to people who frequently had a favorable impression of the Main Street project from the brochure, but who, when informed of the massive scale and traffic impacts, responded with, "I had no idea," and changed their mind. We acknowledge that some concepts of the proposal are attractive, but the massive scale and accompanying negative impacts are not worth the price we will have to pay. Thus our name of the group became One Paseo-Main Street. Bottom line is, we believe that the community needs facts and intelligent estimates relating to the scale and traffic in order to make an informed opinion. So how do we differ from the developer's promotional campaign? One Paseo focuses on the small, attractive parts of the project. They use strategic, idyllic views that, from the inside, that carefully obscure any negative impacts, and they avoid facts altogether. They avoid looking from the outside in, and they are actively soliciting support before the facts are out. One Paseo-Main Street, on the other hand, focuses on the whole project. We want to identify and quantify likely negative impacts. We want to compare the project to familiar situations that we all can relate to. And we want to portray the project from an outside perspective. And we want to solicit support based on likely realities, not pretty pictures. Let me summarize the project. As with many things that sound too good to be true, the devil is in the details. The plans show many things that are not available from the promotional materials. First of all, let's talk about the existing entitlement. It is for 500,000 square foot of office space. It is not going to be a tall building surrounded by a sea of asphalt. There are 16 buildings in Carmel Valley that have similar building area restrictions as the current entitlement, and there are 15 of them are built with 3- and 4-story structures. The traffic expected to be generated from this is 5,700 cars per day, or trips per day. Now the proposed entitlement is 536,000 square foot of office. Now this includes a 10-story and an 8-story office building, plus some office over retail along the Main Street area. The retail is 270,000 square feet. Now this represents a 43% increase over the existing retail development in Carmel Valley north of 56. So it is a very significant increase in retail for this part of Carmel Valley. It's roughly comparable to the Mar Highlands Town Center of 278,000 square feet. Now, there's also going to be a room hotel and 608 residential units, totaling 1,046,000 square feet. Now, one of the residential buildings will be 10 stories, and the balance will be 4 stories over retail. The hotel will be a 5-story building as well. So all told, it comes out to 1,852,000 square feet, which is nearly four times their existing entitlement. In order to accommodate this very high density, there will be parking garages, and there will be over 1.8 million square feet of parking levels that will be built, and they range from 3 to 7 levels. All told, this entitlement is estimated to generate about 26,000 trips per day, or more than 4 times greater traffic generation than their existing entitlement. Now let's talk about density and scale. Before you, the slide shows a architectural rendering, an aerial view. Notice that it's from quite a bit higher altitude than the first slide we showed you. As you obviously, the higher you go from a visual point of view, the lesser the impact of the height of buildings becomes. And so you can expect that when you look at aerial photographs, you should try to visualize what it's going to be like at a ground level, because that's what you will experience. Now, the important thing to bring about here is to compare it with the neighboring Mar Highlands Town Center across El Camino Real from the subject property. Overall, it will have 1,852,000 square feet on 22.8 acres compared to 278,000 square feet on 31 acres of the Mar Highlands Town Center. So it's 9 times greater density, 9 times more building per acre than across the street at the Mar Highlands Town Center. Now, it's going to have 2 10-story office buildings. It's the 10-story buildings. The office building is here next to El Camino Real, and this is a residential building next to High Bluff. It will have 1 8-story office building right here. It will have 4 5-story buildings. This is residential, a hotel, and another residential over retail. All told, there will be 4 parking garages. One of them's right here. The other 3 are underneath, below ground, under this building, and under these 2 buildings right here. The 4 parking garages will have between 3 and 7 levels of parking. And the main thing to talk about there is, where else is a development so dense that it requires that much parking in terms of structured parking? And you'd have to go to someplace like Horton Plaza. It would be an example of where you would find that. Lastly, I bring your attention to the 1-acre main plaza, and that represents only 4.5% of the overall site. Okay, there's another way to look at density and scale. If I were to try to find uses in the current Carmel Valley neighborhood community that replicate what is going to be built on the One Paseo site, I would go to the Hampton Inn, which is 129 rooms versus 150 rooms on the One Paseo project. B is the Marriott Hotel, and that's a 10-story building and an 8-story building next door, office building next door with a parking garage. C represents 608 residential units that are duplexes, fourplexes, and apartment units. And D is the Mar Highlands Town Center, which again has 278,000 square feet. That is close to what the One Paseo site will be having. So some takeaway on this is that A plus B plus C plus D in the densities that are currently in Carmel Valley would be crammed onto the site of the One Paseo site. Well, let's talk about traffic. We all know that traffic is already a problem, particularly during rush hour, morning and in the evening. The proposed project will generate 4 times more traffic than the existing entitlements would generate. That's about 20,000 cars per day increase over that. That represents about, and because I don't know exactly which roads they're going to be taking on, but if I compare that with the traffic that was reported in 2006 for Del Mar Heights Road and El Camino Real, it's going to represent about 35% of that total traffic. So it's a very significantly increase attributable strictly to the additional entitlement being requested. There will be 2 new traffic signals put in on Del Mar Heights Road. The plans show that, and that's not generally mentioned by the developer in any of their promotional materials. It's important to recognize that when the more congested the main arterials get, the more traffic we have diverting through residential neighborhoods. I know the neighborhoods north of Del Mar Heights Road already experiencing that just from the kids going to school in the morning, going to Torrey Pines High School. One other point that is really critical is that while retail seems to be an attractive feature of the project, and many people have different ideas of what they want in terms of retail, retail is a very expensive land use in terms of its utilization of the traffic carrying capacity on roads. It generates 7 to 12 times more traffic than a comparable office use. Parking more than 5 times out of Torrey Pines High School. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, this picture was taken in June of 2011. It was a day in which the county fair was open, and people were coming to Torrey Pines High School to park and to take the shuttle buses. You can see 3 of them here, to the fair, and then the process reverses itself when they return to the Torrey Pines High School. Now, Torrey Pines High School has 775 parking spaces, and the proposed project here will have just under 4,100 parking spaces, or 5.25 times as much as at Torrey Pines High School. So the conclusion that I think is easy to draw is that if this level of congestion can be attributable to the traffic generated as people fill up 775 parking spaces, then if you have 5 times more parking space and people are filling that up and utilizing it, then it's going to be this type of traffic, only more so. It's going to happen every day, and it's going to happen all year long. It's important to recognize that the community plan still has some outstanding existing entitlements. These are allowances for buildings to be built on certain sites. And the 2 main ones are 150,000 square feet on the Mar Highlands Town Center. This is retail area. And the entitlement on Kilroy's One Paseo site, which is entitled to 500,000 square foot of office space. There are also 625,000 square feet of vacant office space along the High Bluff and El Camino Real corridors. So it's very important that these entitlements, that the owners of these properties are able to build in the future. They already have the rights to that. That the traffic that will be generated from those be taken into consideration before considering adding on new entitlements, which will increase the traffic that will be generated from that. So we hope that the traffic study does take that into consideration, but it's a very important part of a concern that we have. There's also a significant potential for overflow parking into residential neighborhoods, and I won't go into too much detail because the parking study has not come out, but suffice it to say that there have been a number of instances where office buildings in the High Bluff corridor have been built according to code, and they will get tenants in there that are high utilization tenants, telemarketers and things like that, and the overflow parking has no place to go except onto residential streets north of Del Mar Heights Road, and we've had situations where it's gone a mile further than Del Mar Heights Road, springing out into both sides of the High Bluff and going into other side streets in the residential neighborhoods. A very unsatisfactory situation. Also, you've probably seen in a lot of the residential condominium developments around Carmel Valley, I'm sure they were built according to the city code for parking. However, the use and demand for car spaces in these facilities overflows and it goes onto residential streets. So those 2 elements are ripe to be found in the proposed development, but we can't say. It's just at this point it's a matter of concern. Now let's talk about open space and parks. There are 608 residential units. City code requires that there be a certain amount of park or recreational field areas related to residential development, and it should be on site. In this project, it's not being provided on site. Instead, there will be a payment to the Facilities Benefit Assessment District, and but there's no more land to buy in Carmel Valley. So that means that the existing parks and recreational fields will be impacted by the additional residential units that are being built. The green areas shown on this slide are the areas that are shown on the vesting tentative map as common areas, and they are largely the landscape areas outside of the office or retail buildings, and that it basically it's called usable open space, but for the most part it's neither usable nor open because it's right up against existing buildings. I want to draw your attention to the One Paseo, or the Main Street parcel. That again is just about an acre, and it's about 4.5% of the total project. And if we were to include all the retail area that's here, and assume that all of that is supportive of the neighborhood gathering place concept, that would represent only 15% of the total building area in the project. And this again does not include parking garages. So the point of all this is that the amount of land that's allocated to the public for its neighborhood gathering place and the retail area to provide amenities for that represents a small part of the overall project, and we're asked to look the other way and focus only on that and not pay attention to all the rest of the development, which in the aggregate has some very serious impacts, not the least of which are traffic and parking and overflow, etc. Let me summarize. The developer's promotion can best be characterized as a takeoff from the 1940 song, accentuate the positive, obscure the negative. The Main Street concept comprises only a small portion of the overall development. UTC, or downtown urban density, will be superimposed onto existing Carmel Valley community. The 10-story office building will be 25% taller than the tallest building in Carmel Valley today. The proposed project will generate 4 times more traffic than the existing entitlement on a road system that has to handle existing unbuilt entitlements as well as built but vacant office space. Finally, the residential component will put an additional strain on neighborhood parks and fields, not to mention maxed out schools in the neighborhood. One final comment: if the developer believes that the community really wants what they're offering in this project, and if they think that the community is willing to accept the massive scale that is being proposed and the negative impacts that go along with it, then I would suggest, in all fairness to the community, that they erect story poles to delineate the building outlines and the heights of the buildings, so that the Carmel Valley residents will get a reasonable picture of how massive this project is. With that, I conclude my comments.